Welcome everyone, Saturday night. It's nice to see so many people, although a lot of you are also guests, so I think about a week and a half ago there was just a couple of guests staying overnight here. It was still had a winter retreat feel, but now we're fairly busy with work and engagement. You probably didn't catch what just occurred a moment ago. I went to go ask permission from Ajahn Cunda, which is a normal thing that we'll do before giving a Dhamma talk, but you won't see Lumpur do that because there's no one senior to him. So the monk who gives a Dhamma talk will ask permission from the senior monk in the room. And I instead asked for forgiveness, a formal forgiveness ceremony statement. And Ajahn Cunda said, "You're forgiven." And then I just completely forgot the statement in Pali, so I asked him in English if I could give a talk. And I was just thinking about how beautiful this life is in terms of something like that. It's just a smile and a joke, is offered when a mistake is made, and there's something quite pleasant and encouraging about that. How skilled relating can be in that way when we're engaging with each other. And so I've been recently reflecting just since Ajahn Yanako has left. It's been he left about mid-December. So it's been just about 4 months, a little bit more than 4 months since he went away and asked me to take care of a lot of his responsibilities. And it's interesting that even though I've worked with Ajahn Yanako for a while and been a monk for 15 years now, and around monasteries about 17 years, 18 years, so it didn't, I haven't related to having a position like that most of the time. I did a little bit of it at the Pacific Hermitage for about a year, but there it's just a couple of monks and that I lived with, so the circumstances are quite different, but it entailed a little bit of the same. But what I'm finding now, and just reflecting on it in 4 months, is the difference of perception that I have, and I think many of you can identify with this when you step into a different role in your life, and especially like when you're the leader of something or the head of something. It just, there's really no one. When a decision needs to be made, sometimes there's just people you can consult, but then you have to make that decision, or things are done spontaneously. And just the difference that I didn't, it's just different always having somebody else to your right or your left that you can kind of be like, well, you make the decision. And so for the last 4 months, the winter retreat there wasn't a lot going on, but since then it's been more of this sense of having to figure out a role of leading others in a good way. And I found that basically, it's sort of obvious and been talked about many times by, I think, the other Ajahns who've been in these similar positions, just that without patience, it can be a very difficult experience. And without that sense of just not jumping into something and not feeling the need to just make a decision right away or answer right away, or when there is something that seems like very obvious, that it's not always right to initiate response. And what I found this mostly is when the critical mind comes up. So however many of you have been aware of your own critical mind when you're having to deal with other people, it immediately becomes like, just a sense of, I was thinking of, I think it was when I was younger, there was a cartoon called Ren and Stimpy, and there was this one line from one of the two, I don't remember which one was which name. And I could be wrong, but it was just this, "You idiot." It was this one statement, and that just, I don't think that, but that the attitude can come out like that. It can kind of feel like that in the mind when I want to respond. And so sometimes I see that, and today I was speaking with one of the monks after one of those situations that occurred, and I just noticed that there was a sharpness in me in how I was responding to seeing how something was done, that I had actually given instruction about how I wanted it to be done and how I thought it should be done. And then it was done in a very different way, with something in a way that I thought was actually quite inappropriate. And just watching that heat arise, and it wasn't until I was like halfway through kind of explaining that, oh, this isn't gonna be received well because there's some heat behind it. And so that recognition was, well, how do I work with that as best that I can in situations, because there are, a fair amount of them that can come up. And what one of the monks had said was, well, around perception is like, well, you're dealing with a lot of the monks who haven't been doing this as long as you, and so that's, that needs to be part of the perception. And immediately I thought, like, well, I mean, they might have not been doing it so long, but they should have figured it out by now. And it was like, no, that's correct. There's, there's been a certain amount of years now that I've lived, and then a lot of those years in the robes, and things they've been internalized and become very natural. And it just sort of came up for me a lot around how I was when I was a very junior member of the community. And the same exact thing would occur, where I would go up to one of the teachers here, and I think I tend to do that much more so than others. And when I would ask a question or want something, it wasn't always met with a lot of patience, because of the amount of times that I would actually ask for things. And the other thing that comes up is that when these things are asked for, there's just, it's interesting being at the top, because you recognize that, you're the one who people see as like the gatekeeper to their own desires. And so the same kind of requests come up, the same kind of things come up from very particular monastics who live in the community. And there has to be, again, that patience in responding, sort of like an encouragement around teaching and wanting them to see what is, what's kind of appropriate in terms of like asking for something or asking about something, and what is actually coming from what I perceive as something that we would call unwholesome or not helpful for them, not helpful for their practice. And so it also becomes a bit of, dealing with that patience around responding to people when they might actually be hurt, or they might have a painful response based on the fact that you just can't say yes all the time. You have to say no. But again, it just keeps coming back to, I think for me, the sense of like trying to remember how I was when I was a junior monk, and how often my perception was, like, I want to get this done, or I want this thing to happen, or I want to get my way. And when I had a sort of sense of like how I was being taught, it was injustice. This isn't right, And so that's just been something I've been trying to reflect on, because it's become more difficult to keep those memories alive because the role has shifted so much. And I also can identify the fact that because that role shifts, then I have to see the problem that occurs with my own desires and how I want to get things done, because it's much easier now to get those accomplished, and then therefore I can step into things that are not always maybe the right time for something to get done, or the right way, or it just might be that it's my own particular desire to have something done, and it's not really that important, or as important as I think it is for the community. So all these things have been arising, and they're, just thinking about them as encouragements for yourself to think in your own lives, like, how do you work with your own roles, what you're doing, the responsibilities you have, and how much they're just like a perception, thinking like, I am the leader or something like that, or I'm the one who is making these decisions. And that cognitive sense doesn't really come up for me very much, just those words. But there's an attitude that can arise out of that. And I think it's very important, because we often will build a self out of that experience. We will build, like, this is who I am, this is what I am. And then when that changes, it can be very, very painful. So just identifying, like, with Lumpur Pasano and Ajahn Amaro, when they were co-abbots, and starting to really remember now what that was like when they were training me, and just how that perception shifts over time, and then it's the karma that one can reflect on. And so I've also been reflecting on that, the results of my own behavior as a junior monk, kind of growing into having more years as a monk, and then seeing, like, oh right, this is the things that I'm particularly annoyed with are the ways that I acted towards my teachers. And so it's quite a sobering experience, quite a helpful way to reflect on it. The different, just some of the comical things. I remember in one winter retreat, I was the stores monk, and so I just saw it as an opportunity. Being the stores monk during the winter retreat, I think I was like maybe it was my first year as a monk, and I would go in every day during breakfast, and I'd present. It's just funny to even think about. So I'd walk up and I'd have something, like I had like these crystals in my hand, and said, what can I do with this? And they'd say something, and then they were being very patient, and I just wasn't getting the hint. And then one day Lumpur said, "Go away." And it was a great lesson for me, because it was, I was kind of like shocked, but I wasn't getting it. I wasn't understanding what was happening in that moment, that like they were being patient, but I wasn't seeing cues that they were saying, like, maybe, it's the winter retreat, do you need to go through all these items, and can we do this later? Is this something that we can do after the winter retreat? Or also just to be aware of them and their time, and why do they need to put their attention on this? And so that's another thing that's very helpful to reflect on. There's how to behave as a monastic with others. In a way, we have to be very careful about how we interact with each other, and the sort of the burdens we place on each other, or what we how we relate to each other is often it's different, I think, than the way I used to kind of relate in the world. And there is a sense of respect out of the monks who've spent a fair amount of time in the robes, and how much is there really a care for their role, their duties, and what they're doing in the monastery, and also trying not to burden them. And so it's just thinking about that is It's just a sort of flip of my whole experience. And of course, when it was with Lumpur Pasun Ajahn Amaro, and many of you have possibly heard or were around for some of those times, but it was a very special experience because the two of them are very different monks, and they share, of course, the same principles, but the way that they interact as teachers was quite different, and so just that sense of kind of knowing that it's quite a personal thing. There's Ajahn Kovalo just came today, and he's trying to do a translation of a book about a Thai forest monk named Lumpur Jia. And Lumpur Jia was known as being more than fierce in his teachings, and he particularly liked to make axes, and and so sometimes if some of the monks were misbehaving, like an axe would end up like on their front door, like in the door. He wasn't doing anything violent to them, but he was just a very fierce, and his character was just very fierce and quite scary. But he was a teacher. He was known as an arahant, and so each of the ways that these teachers are, they have different qualities, and I surely display that myself. And the nice part about it is that it becomes a reflection. It becomes a very helpful part of being a monk when put into a role like this, because I can very quickly see like, oh yeah, there's a lot of work to do, and I don't think that before there was often a sense of wanting to run away from that kind of responsibility, or really enjoying the fact that there was somebody else that I could defer to. And that's still there in the mind, but when there's no one else there, then there's just lessons to be learned. And so I think it's quite helpful to kind of reflect on that in our lives, like what are the differences that have changed over time? What are the different qualities we have? Like some, just thinking of like, Ethan here is our contractor, and before he was somebody who was working in the field of building, and then became a contractor with employees, and that just changes the whole dynamic of how we relate to others, and we end up having to be quite careful and responsible for how we take care of other people, how we work with other people. So and the other thing that comes with being a monk is that each person that we relate to is different, and so some people I can say something to, and I know one particular monk, it just has no effect on him, whatever, in terms of his taking it personally, and it's quite amazing to relate to somebody that way, because it doesn't matter what I say. It's just thank you very much, and so that's quite beautiful. And then in other ways it takes more time with others, where there might be a very personal take on, like, if I say something that might be helpful, then their take is they're wrong and they're a bad person. And I surely remember feeling that way when I received certain feedback from senior monks when I was a junior monk. So it's always kind of having that sense, and the Buddha taught about that. He said that one of the skills that one can learn, and that he's learned, is he speaks to people differently. He has a different way of speaking to people, and he was talking more in a cultural aspect, how to approach people differently based on what's expressed in the society or in the culture. So I was thinking, one of the, just a sort of an example of this was sort of, I was in my bathroom the other day, and in the bathroom in this particular office, and I noticed that and it's someone comes in and cleans it, and so I just noticed that the one of the things in the bathroom wasn't, everything else was quite clean, and then I saw that the faucet wasn't clean, and so I noticed that over several days or weeks, and then when I brought it up, the monk very kindly said, "Oh," I looked and I said, "Oh, do you see anything that's not clean in there?" And he looked and he couldn't see it. And then I said, "Oh, look at the faucet." And so he said, "Oh, I never noticed that." And so that was a perfect time to be able to say, right, that's something to see in your own practice, right? In terms of like obviously just looking out how you perceive things and see things. But more importantly, it's like how are we seeing that in our own minds? Like when we're engaging with the Dhamma, for example, are we just taking a meditation object and using that and then not reflecting on whether it's working or not, or what's appropriate with that meditation object, or that maybe we're having a lot of desire coming up and we're just sending ourselves metta and nothing seems to work, but we are not trying some other method. So like the practice with the unbeautiful or something that could deal with that a little bit better. So sometimes we're using the same tool for all the different problems we have, but it's not really appropriate. And so that can come up in terms of how we see the world. And these are just kind of lessons that one can take, just kind of living with others and seeing when these things arise. And I find it just so helpful living in community, and the guests who come here will usually see that more often, or there's a couple of fellows here now, Max and Xander, who want to take on becoming Anagarikas. And I remember for example, the first 2 weeks of being an Anagarika, it was pretty rough because I was eager to learn, but there was just so much that, with how to take care of the bowl I was having, how to eat, when to eat, how to wear the robes I was wearing, how to try to not get them dirty, when to wear them, when not to wear them, when to wear something. I mean, it was just a huge sort of hockey stick of how much learning was done in a short period of time, and how much I needed to receive. And so that patience was needed to be there, and also just not taking it so personally, not taking it as like a flaw. Because what often came up in that situation was, oh, I should have gotten this quicker, or why can't I have observed this myself and done it? And then there were the other times of just feeling resistant. I didn't actually want to learn, or I didn't want it to be that way. I wanted it to be the way I wanted to do it. And so I wasn't really receptive to hearing others in certain ways. And so as, in the position I'm in now, that's what I'm finding is often required, is just to remember that and say like, well, yeah, that's, rather than moving into frustration, just kind of remembering, oh, right, this is dukkha. When somebody has a hard time receiving feedback, or I'm not giving it in a particular way that's helpful, there's dukkha there. There's suffering. And just to be aware of that, then compassion can arise, and more of a sense of carefulness around how I can engage with others, or how I can deal with a particular response that I might need to make. So in terms of your own lives, I think it's beneficial to think about that, whether you're a husband or wife, or a father, mother, or you have roles of being a teacher, or you're receiving things from others in terms of feedback from others. All of these things we can change our particular perceptions of how we're doing things. I've thought, I never ended up being a parent, and I've thought often about like what would that have been like, and how would I have be dealing with my children, because of course I would have a perception of them, and I would have a whole self built around my perception of what I am as a father, likely. I'm thinking about this, or I'm thinking this is how it would be, and then I would also interpret I have a particular perception of my son or daughter, and I would keep creating them in that way in terms of that perception, and how careful I would need to be, because I can see it happening with particular monks here. And what I mean by that is, you see someone, or you interact with the same person over and over again, and then in your mind you have created that person as a solid being, sort of like personified the unchanging nature of them, and that's who they are. They're this kind of unsurprising person to you, because you're not surprised. That's how they're going to act in this particular situation or another. And often I'm just very surprised, because I get to see, like, oh, that's completely untrue. I just see so many different ways that people are, and ways that they're improving, and that all just comes with trying to just remind myself around being patient. And so just imagining the different roles we have in our work, or how someone might, again, interact with their children or a spouse. It's just being aware of that kind of sense of how we continue to have these different outlooks of the world or the people we live with, and sometimes just not checking that, not really being aware that when we see another, we are actually creating that other person in our mind. It's a sankhara. They've become a sankhara for us, a mental formation. And what we can forget is that sense of anicca, that sense that it's impermanent. Not only could they vanish in a day, which we don't usually think about, but they could change. They could change how they are, their personality can change. All kinds of things that we take for granted in others. And so I think it's really useful because it can wake us up out of our sort of sleepy lives in terms of our interpretations of how we live and how we relate to others. And I just want to also add that this is, this practice that we're doing is not an easy practice. It's quite difficult, and there are rare beings in the world who have an easier time with it. But for the most part, I think for the most part, what I've seen is that the practice it can take a lot of time for the results to manifest, and it can come with a lot of difficulty. And we don't have to despair because of that, but it is helpful to notice when we have had successes in our practice, or we are able to see something, and even just seeing a mistake or seeing a problem after we've sort of made that mistake, after we've kind of engaged in something unwholesome, even that is incredibly beautiful and something that we can rejoice in and remember that, oh, right, when I've done a particular thing that hasn't been too helpful to myself or others, then if I don't know it, that's even more of a serious problem than just kind of the fact that I did that one thing. It's just an additive effect. If we're unaware of having harmed somebody else or having done something that was unskillful, we're just going to keep repeating that same thing. So even though we tend to sometimes know these things, it can be quite difficult to prevent ourselves from doing them again. So we endeavor to try and do that, and we do that with a lot of patience and care. Patience for ourselves doing these things and trying to sort of steer the boat, the kind of the tanker. It feels like sometimes it's just like a train, like trying to slow down a train. These habits can be very strong for us, but with that sense of patience, we can be a bit more kind to ourselves in terms of relating to the fact that Rome wasn't built in a day. We have to take time to change these habits, to move towards the wholesome. But the point is we keep trying. We keep falling and picking ourselves up, dusting ourselves off, and continuing on. And one of the ways that comes through is just seeing that when we have a success, we remind ourselves, right, okay, that was moving in the right direction. I did the right thing. And or when we do something that was unhelpful or unwholesome, then we say, okay, well, I really genuinely try to endeavor not to do that again. So I think that's probably enough for tonight. And if there's anything that I said that was useful for you, then please reflect on it and use it in your own lives. And any other things that were not so useful, just feel free to leave it behind.